Hey everybody, it's Mr. Van. We're jumping into our sixth unit here. This one is Western Medicine, Worldviews, and the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or DSM as it gets called. We're going to take down the patriarchy. Okay, so in order to really get a sense of how we are currently approaching mental health, we need to understand um, what dominant worldviews have come to play, the Western medical worldview and Western worldview generally speaking, and we have to understand just really quickly, and you all know this from previous socials classes, I think especially socials 9, if I remember correctly, would cover this quite a bit, just how it came to be that there was the allowance of one system to dominate so much. So we know that basically from 1500 to 2000, the massive industrial, military, and trade powers that pushed Europe out just meant that they had overwhelming resources and overwhelming territory that allowed them to then push their ideals and their perspectives, we often call this worldviews, onto those around. And this kind of laid the foundation. It's, you know, it's tough because I think we don't normally think about the fact that if you have an industrial, military, and trade power, that doesn't intrinsically in any way suggest that you are the best suited medical system to deal with mental health. But you're given that dominance, and I kind of talk about that. You can see Western dominance and beliefs of superiority. There's a few things that describe this. One that I like is called the illusory superiority, which it also exists with individuals and also in societies or civilizations. It's the idea that um, because you exist in a greater space, you yourself are greater. And the problem is that human beings often we all do this sadly, uh, we overreach how good we are at things and how successful we will be at things as a result of our position and our privilege. Um, and so it's important to understand that just because the Western medical system has been so dominant doesn't mean it's the best. It just means it's been the most dominant. And I want to be careful in saying that there are some brilliant elements to the Western medical system and need to get their credit, as we will talk about in class. But just to understand that um, certain perspectives, just like we talk about history and herstory, certain perspectives are given a lot more credence, a lot more thought, and don't necessarily deserve it. So that Western dominance in the last point there has kind of created the suppression of other beliefs, knowledge, and medical practices. It creates a superior inferior situation, and that kind of really sets up how we come to our approach of Western medical approaches to mental health. Okay, last slide, I promise, on the history lesson here. Former socials teacher, just can't say no, though. So just understanding, and I think we'll all know this. So Western worldviews, what's really at the core of it? Well, individualism over collectivism. So we know that a lot of traditional smaller groups of people have always followed under collectivist principles. Everyone is part of a whole, and the whole is the most important thing. In Western worldview, the individual is the most important thing. This is what's given the power to capitalism so much. Everyone kind of for themselves do the best they can, and everyone else can figure themselves out. So that's going to be playing in in our medical system here, individual over collective. The next one is that empirical science is absolute truth. Now, this has done brilliant things for the physical health development of the Western medicine system. There's no doubt about it. It's incredible what our medical systems have done and continue to do, and the research that continues in things like cancer. Um, it does it does sometimes cause issues when there isn't very clear empirical science for mental health. What we know is that the brain is more complicated than anything else in our body, and so our understanding is not on a level that we can really apply empirical science to as much of it as we would like. We like to suggest that we know everything sometimes, and people often believe that psychiatrists, for example, will know everything, but it's so complex that they can't possibly actually do this. So you have a system that suggests absolute truth in some respects, but actually can't deliver it. And so we'll talk about the challenges of that. The suppression and control of nature, resource extraction for wealth. These are things you know. It's the entire European imperial model that went and took over the world and then took everything from all those countries. Liberal democratic principles, which aren't really going to show up in our discussion, understanding medical ideas and beliefs, but are are definitely a factor and key part to Western worldviews, even if they're not so much in what we're discussing today. And then a race for wealth. And a race for wealth is going to show up quite considerably. It gets a little more talk than it used to. It was a bit more subverted before, but the the general understanding is that massive corporations that are pushing pharmaceutical drugs are as or more interested in profit as they are as actually outcomes for patients. It's it's not that they don't want good outcomes for patients, they certainly do, but that there's a additional element there that really complicates the situation. So we just have to keep these perspectives and worldviews in perspective. A bit of a mouthful there when we go through. So not much to say here, but we're going to do a little bit of in-class activity, just looking at the differences between Western medical ideals and beliefs, and then the non-Western medical ideals and beliefs, of which there are many. I mentioned three here, from the Eastern kingdoms, the indigenous, local to BC and abroad, and then also some traditional medicine. So we'll just do a little bit of look there and see what people already know. Okay, so this all leads us to what we introduced in last class, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Here's a really old, cool version. I love old books; they're so interesting. Um, Now, this is kind of like a precursor, so um, we're not going to be using that one on the page, and I think it's in a rare book collection somewhere. Um, but the DSM is is something that, as we'll read about and go through, something that came out of um, World War II, as the U.S. government, and I believe governments abroad, but specifically the U.S. government, were looking for ways to help categorize and understand some of the mental distresses that were going on for troops as they came back. We know that one of the most traumatic things that people can go through in life is war. And the Western medical principles did not have a way of classifying or understanding, which again is crucial to Western civilizations, to be able to classify and sort people. We love to be able to do that, and our brains are designed to do that. You walk down the street and you see people, and you're constantly sorting and evaluating. So not being able to do that with people who were in mental distress coming out of World War II was quite problematic, and they wanted ways to be able to understand who should be given compensation and label what was going on. And there was more altruistic support as well for trying to help people, of course. But all of this created a need coming out of World War II to better classify. And so the DSM is born. And it is a way, for the last 70 years, it's basically, or I guess 80 years now, for the last 80 years, it's the driving force in the driving worldview of how to approach understanding mental illness. So once we've kind of gone through and we've looked at the DSM and we've had our conversation and done our reading, we're going to jump into looking at one of the examples. We'll do more of these in a future unit as well, especially when we look at anxiety and depression. But we're going to just take panic disorder as an example, and we'll do that for this class. So I've brought I'll bring some handouts for it, and you'll actually dig into seeing like what are the requirements. When we go through this, you'll notice on the lower points there. We're really going to be focusing on how might it be helpful and what might be challenging about how it's presented. Just again, really trying to think holistically about the DSM as both really valuable and also really challenging. There's limitations that come from, again, the worldviews and how we approach mental illness, but there's also real value in being able to identify and quickly um, allowing medical professionals to help quickly diagnose. So we'll talk about the yin and yang of that, and try to come up with a balanced view together as a class, looking at panic disorder. So we spoke about this a little bit in Unit 5's video, but didn't have much of a chance to go into it. We'll go into it a bit more today as we're digging into the DSM more. Essentially, the diagnosing circular effect is this fallacy, a logical fallacy that basically says that the diagnosis often becomes the cause of the symptoms, while simultaneously being defined by those exact same symptoms. So you get stuck in a loop where you're basically just explaining what happened by what happened and what happened by what you think happened. Um, and so you end up in a situation where you don't actually ever get to the root of what's going on. And that obviously is quite problematic, as it's kind of like taking Tylenol. your symptom is the problem, so you take Tylenol and it goes away, and then 4 hours later it comes back, and you go, why did it come back? Well, it's because you just numbed it out. You didn't actually deal with the issue, and so a lot of what goes on and the potential risk for diagnoses can be that we are only addressing symptoms, and that in fact brings us back to where we are, and we're not dealing with underlying issues. I love the little fact at the bottom. It's fascinating to me. It speaks to the importance of going deeper into what's going on. So, if you're born in British Columbia during the month of December, you're 39% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than somebody born in other months on average. Specifically, I'll give you a hint. July. Why might it be that people born in December are 39% more likely to be diagnosed than people born perhaps in the middle of the year or earlier in the year? We'll talk about it in class. So we're going to do a group discussion, just looking at the pros and cons. This will be kind of time dependent, but we'll do some pro and con looking at the DSM, disadvantages and advantages, and see if we can come to a class decision on the best use of it. So how do we most effectively use the DSM will kind of be what we're looking to solve. Okay, so to finish off our sixth class, we're going to hopefully do a little demonstration with myself and a student volunteer, so think if you'll be up for it. Um, and this is kind of trying to take our newly found understanding of how the DSM can be useful, and then how to apply it to a more well-rounded approach to how we are looking at diagnoses and supports. We know, for example, that medication can be really valuable, but medication plus therapeutic support is incredibly more valuable together. So trying to take our symptoms-based Western medicine approach and add in a more holistic approach that's going to round out the supports for someone who maybe has been recently diagnosed with a mental illness or going through a mental health crisis. There's a question in the middle there that I really like. It says, what valid problem is the behavior attempting to fix? And so this comes from the principle that I and a lot of other people, both teachers and educators and counselors and parents, I think, all subscribe to, which is the idea that people don't do things badly or incorrectly or cruelly without a misunderstanding. So more specifically, if somebody, for example, was in a grade 3 classroom and they were acting out and causing a whole bunch of disturbance, and it was pissing off other students and the teacher, and you'd be thinking, why on earth would the student want to do this? It's obviously not in their best interest. Well, what this says is actually we can go to the root cause and say, well, what is this behavior actually trying to fix or solve? This behavior is purposeful, and if we get a better understanding of what's going on beneath the surface and not just dealing with the symptoms but understanding the root cause, we'll be able to better treat that person. So we'll do an example hopefully in class.